In this interview, I speak with my good friend, Jacqueline Clare. She's a painter, illustrator, and storyteller, and has interesting stories to share from doing some acting in LA. She was a featured painter at Freedom Fest in Rapid City, South Dakota, where we finally met in person after bonding online over crises in our Baha'i faith, which prophesizes a divine civilization and world order. The focus of her integrated work is to empower audiences of all ages to develop a deeper connection to their spiritual reality. She also produces a biweekly podcast called Spiritual Conversation and has a very active YouTube channel where she explores life, art, relationships, and the state of the world in a very raw and personal tone, which I appreciate. She lives in New Braunfels, Texas, which she describes as a little time-traveled German river town hidden between Austin and San Antonio. Learning about her journey from Hollywood to small-town Texas, I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Leaving the Left for Liberty. So we're exploring in this series why someone might muster up moral courage in a time when it's quite controversial to step out as an individual. So as an artist, as a Texan, as a podcaster, and an all-around beautiful human being, what motivates you to be brave?
Ooh, that's so sweet, Sienna. All of it comes back to a fundamentally spiritual orientation and view of life. I think that at the heart, all of these issues are spiritual issues, our individual lives, the way we manifest our beliefs and our priorities in the world, and then the world that is reflected through that, And so, like, at the core of it, that is what motivates me. I don't think that and I'll say I don't think I am here living this life to be comfortable. And I'm not here to just try to, ease through with the path of least resistance by just going along with what other people are doing. I think that I'm here to grow and develop my soul. And to me, that involves being like rigorously honest and always questioning whether it's the outer world or my own beliefs or my own reactions to things. And then, living what I come up with through that, you know what I mean? Like living my beliefs, knowing that they will evolve and change. But ultimately it comes down to just knowing I'm not here to be comfortable, and I need to live a life that I'm proud of, which is like being honest and brave.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I do sense that among other alternative voices that we are not here to be comfortable. We are here to be courageous and stand in our sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one way of doing that is through art. So how does your art contribute to the needs of our time as you see them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that art can go directly to a person's heart, and visual art in particular, which is my primary medium. It doesn't have lyrics, it doesn't have words, it doesn't have these layers or these storylines that are handed to you. It's more like a dream. It's like symbols and images, which may be interpreted differently, from me to the viewer to the next viewer to the next viewer. But my intention and my hope is that it goes right to that heart core center of each individual, and that, like a dream, literally, it speaks to what you need to hear right now. It speaks to like, oh, this image reminds me that I need to step up in this area of my life, or this image reminds me that I need to relax into this area of my life, or to remember that there's infinite possibility, or whatever it is. So reaching people's hearts, which I think is the the hardest and yet most important thing to do. We have so much clamoring for the attention of our minds, and our minds can be manipulated and lead to all these places and whatever, and all these like talking points and jargons and ideologies. But like, what is your heartbeat center telling you? So I hope in doing that and reaching people's hearts that it touches that core of bravery, where they have a sense of, I'm not here to be comfortable. I am like this amazing energetic being, and I'm here to grow and to learn and to do what I think is right to make the world a better place. And that it really sparks a sense of joy and courage. And joy, I think, gives us momentum for acting on our courage. And I love how Brene Brown kind of culturally redefined courage, which is to speak one's heart, or to speak your whole heart. And I think it goes beyond that. Words are really important and they're needed, but they're only one layer. Like, then the action to like act with your whole heart. So I again, it's, I have no control over how people react to my art, but that is what motivates me, that I can bring forth these evocative, dreamlike, spiritual images that resonate on a heart level and activate that inner sense of joy and courage to forge through the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about Brene Brown as you were talking, and then you brought
That's
her up.
crazy.
I'm so glad that you did, because I think it was through Brene Brown that I learned that courage, the word courage, actually stems from heart. Cur apparently comes from the word heart. And I think we've gotten to this, we as in like the collective, we have gotten to this place where wherever it is we are, we've gotten there through emotion. Many have gotten there through emotion and perhaps not through fact. And that's no necessarily like no fault of anyone's per se. I think it speaks to the human condition and the artist within each of us, because we are made of stories. We are art forms. I think art is a way of living. That's how I was raised too. I think we have that in common. So I think what's beautiful about art is that it, like you said, it can reach the heart, and it can unite across these very 3D divides that are very real and very stark. But there is a way of rising above them through art, and I think that's what you're doing. It's beautiful.
I hope so.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the corruption in this country. And during our talk today, I kind of want to like ebb and flow between art and spirituality and politics, just kind of immerse ourselves in those worlds. So before awakening to the corruption in our country, what were your passions and your goals, and what were you uncertain about?
So I've always been a spiritual person, and I was really raised in a spiritual and religious context. But what I perceive now is that the spiritual element of my life used to be more like the icing on the cake, which I think is very common for people. Like, well, this is my life and my goals, my whatever. And on top of it, I'm going to, put this pretty coating of woo woo spiritual, whatever. And I'll go to church on Sunday, or I'll say my prayers at night or whatever. But it's like, it's just like, oh, and God, and for me, this whole craziness, not just in our country, in the whole world, the becoming more aware of the corruption and wanting to be like an active agent in exposing it, or waking people up, or making the world a better place, however we want to say it. This is a spiritual battle. And my journey has been more from, rather than spirituality being something that's coated on top to make things pretty, it's more an inner drive and fire. And how does this orient every aspect of my life? So I don't know, I suspect I may be coming from a slightly different place from a lot of the people that you interview, but that's like the most fundamental thing that has changed for me, where my spiritual orientation has become an inner drive that expresses itself outwardly as opposed to the reverse. And I used to be an actress, and ever since I was a kid, that was like my plan. I'm gonna, kind of the childish dream that every little girl has, except I never grew out of it. I just meant it. So, I didn't realize it until you invited me to this interview, but I mean, I think that whole change, I was living in LA when I started to have my, I don't know, worldly or political awakening. And it coincided with me also shifting away from acting and being a part of telling other people's stories, which is one main reason why I left the film industry, because I wanted more of a voice to tell my own stories and to be more direct with people, like to get to talk about spiritual reality and that sort of thing. And also, I think even just that move towards acting and all of that, I was absorbing the values of my culture, and like we revere people who are on the screen, and we revere people who blah 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 XYZ. So even though I claim to have a spiritual practice and spiritual principles, ultimately I was completely guided by the talking points of my culture, whether it was my profession or my beliefs about any particular topic. So for me, that's very much like the theme of this show and this project here, like leaving groupthink, leaving what I was told to value and believe for something that is like inner directed and part of my search for truth and expression.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you brought up Hollywood, in essence, LA, right? That is one sector of our country that is definitely full of corruption, and there's a lack of authenticity, and frankly, I think there's a godlessness there. Matthew McConaughey has spoken to that rather poignantly, and actually, you're not different from any of the others that I've interviewed. Many of them, who I have interviewed or have them scheduled, many of them have this in common, that they believe in God and they feel that we are in a spiritual battle, or at least they do have a spiritual core within them that guides them to be brave.
And isn't that interesting that I kind of made the assumption that that wasn't the case? And even making that assumption is like me apologizing for talking about God or my spirituality, which I think is like this cultural thing. Like, oh, don't go there, girl. You're going to lose people if you mention that,
Yeah, there's almost this shame about it, like, oh, it's just, and I think that's why perhaps for many of us, and even for myself before 2020, I believed in God even then, and I considered myself spiritual, but it was that sort of icing on the cake, or something like underneath that I didn't really talk about unless someone else brought it up, or unless I was already in a spiritual or religious space. So that is so interesting that we both were kind of dancing around it too, like, is this, and yeah, and I do feel that in leaving the left for liberty, for myself and for a lot of people, that is one reason, is that they don't necessarily leave the left for the right, but they just leave the groupthink for spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So while you were in LA pretty early on in this journey of leaving the culture of the left, what was one ideology that didn't sit right with you?
It's not just one ideology. It's the just oppression of not being able to have a different point of view. You know, this professed openness to everything under the sun, right? The weirder and, you know, more corrupt, the better sort of thing almost. And then the moment you bring up God, or the moment you bring up like, oh, really? That hasn't been my experience, or oh, really? I like men, or like whatever it is, then it's like completely no, 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 that's not allowed. This just hard push against the, you know, there's different sensitive topics, but mostly just that's powerful tidal wave of no, that's not allowed. You know, we are tolerant, we accept everyone except you. You know what I mean? Like that was the thing where it was like, wait, you know, and it's like you could only see the naked emperor so many times without being like, no, 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 actually, I'm not crazy. You are.
Yeah, I hear you. It's not one. I feel like it's all one big ideology. So to ask what's one part of it that didn't sit right with you, like it makes sense that you'd just be like all of it. It's all one big ideology, one big group think. And when you were really in the thick of it in LA, what was your conscience telling you?
Mm. Mm. um well, my conscience was pretty beaten down because you constantly have to make compromises in that industry. I think um maybe they're more over the top than other industries. You know what I mean? Like most people don't have to like wonder whether or not they're going to get naked on their job. You know what I mean? Only actors have to think about that. But especially like through Project Veritas and stuff, we're seeing lots of people have very big moral dilemmas and dilemmas of conscience, or they should, in their jobs. So that's a really interesting question. Like it took a while, I think, to really awaken to what my conscience was telling me. And in my case, it was really all cohesive. I'm kind of only seeing those connections now between like my life in the film industry and the whole shift and everything, because I wasn't necessarily putting the pieces together at that time. It was like separate little things that were being worked out in my life, like becoming aware of the lies of the media and the manipulation and the corruption. At the same time, I was just admitting on a personal level that the the grind of LA and the telling other people's stories and putting my heart and soul into things that didn't feel fulfilling to me or uplifting to the world, like wasn't working. Meanwhile, I returned to doing visual art and that felt really good. So it was all kind of more feminine and fluid. It wasn't like I understood everything that was going on at the time. But yeah, LA culture is just a lot of just that same thing of like permissiveness on the one hand, and you know, if you don't support certain ideas or you're not willing to do certain things for the sake of your art, then you're holding yourself back or you're backwards or whatever. But then you can't voice support of anything that's not part of the approved thing. So it's just like very strong sense of rejection for anything like that.
Hmm. Was there a moment, or is there like a certain memory that comes up when you talk about the permissiveness and the rejection?
Hmm. I mean, it's really the whole thing. I ended up leaving LA in early 2018. So it was just interesting to like watch the evolution of like environments that I was in, or the school that I trained at and all that stuff, and like really big beautiful ideas, but then how like crotchety and narrow and ugly everything became once that president was in the picture. You know what I mean? Like these people who had been all about like love and acceptance and art and beauty were suddenly so triggered and so um just hateful. um so like it was just that slow cognitive dissonance about like, why, wait, it's almost like a virus. Like, why is everyone suddenly turning into like this scary monster? And I get it, you don't like this person, but and you think it's dangerous and all that stuff. I respect that perspective, but it's like it's literally like a zombie movie where everyone starts to take on the exact same zombie like characteristics. Like there is very little uniqueness. It's like everyone's skin is turning green and they're, you know, like it's like you look just like that other person who's totally triggered and upset. Like what's going on here? Like why is everyone getting triggered in the exact same way, saying the exact same things? um so yeah, it was more of a gradual, just like, you know, realizing I was in a zombie movie. And then 2020, I mean, and I was already outside of LA by then, but I think that was sort of, that was when the line in my own life and mind was crossed, like where I sort of officially was like, I think I'm not part of this world anymore. And not just acting or LA or anything, just the whole sort of mainstream groupthink, whatever, that I had grown up with. Um, and there was just so many things. It was the virus, it was the inflammation of the race issue and how that was handled. Like those things combined, 2020 was like the,
Mm-hmm.
you know, cut off year.
It was a breaking point for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, so many questions. But I would like to ask you first, before I forget, um,
Yeah.
what spiritual beliefs do you have around racial healing and its importance in the overall country's spiritual awakening and the world's spiritual awakening?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a big question. I think I think for any healing on any level, we have to be thinking for ourselves and not just regurgitating concepts and ideas that have been handed to us or drilled into us. And I think with the 24-hour news cycle and social media and all that stuff, it's really, really hard to escape just the constant messaging that we get. And we can't heal something as deep as racial um, prejudice or disparities with that happening. We couldn't heal a friendship with that happening, right? If you have a riff with a friend, and I think that's a good way to look at it. Like we're all friends here and we're all one family. And, you know, there have been pains in the past, but like fundamentally we're one and we're buddies here. But you can't heal that with constant intervention from all these other voices saying, no, 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 she actually hates you. She hates you really bad. And remember that time that she did blah, blah, blah. And then the other side maybe is saying the same thing. Like, obviously, that would never work. You could never heal your friendship if you were constantly being fed things like that. So it's and that's kind of my answer for everything. And that's what my art is about and everything. I think until we're able to be in touch with our own hearts and see with our own eyes and think our own thoughts, can we make progress or heal anything? And so honesty and thinking for yourself is fundamental. And then beyond that, those continue, being honest and all that, but also some degree of forgiveness and some degree of compassion and some degree of a willingness to learn and move forward. So I think once we get all the static out of the way, it's kind of simple. And I don't always know how much talking about things help. Sometimes I think we just need to like hug it out and say, okay, like, you want to move forward? I want to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And individuality and thinking for oneself, I think those are spiritual and artistic concepts. I mean, if you look at the art behind you, I mean, there are details there. There are different colors, there are different shapes, different images. We agree. We've talked about the metaphor of humanity being flowers of one garden.
Mm-hmm.
And through being flowers of one garden, we're also diverse not only in race, ethnicity, and culture, but also in thought. Perhaps that is the most important form of diversity, is diversity of thought. So I don't know about you, but I've really been wrestling with this idea that we are flowers of one garden. Could we be flowers of an infinity number of gardens, at least right now?
Mm. Yeah, totes. Or the garden itself is infinite. Yeah, definitely. There's something about diversity. Yeah, just, oh, I think diversity of thought is the more challenging one, frankly. And like embracing diversity of thought. And I think that's our immutable characteristics. As much as we have struggled with them in the past and are struggling to some degree now, I'm really not sure how much of that is authentic and how much of that has been sort of shaken up. But I think that's easy, or it's going to be easy compared to a deep embrace of diversity of thought, which to me isn't just, well, I tolerate you and you tolerate me. And, to me, embracing diversity of thought is the profound and humble acknowledgement that we see things differently, or we understand things differently, or we have different strengths, different things that contribute. And that is a good thing. And that's what makes us collaborators. And that's what gives us, as friends or as humanity or as a family, whatever it is, strength, because we are different and we do see things differently. And like, I appreciate that you see that differently and that you challenge me to look at things a different way, or that you can see where I have blind spots. Like, that's the profound heavyweight stuff that I think if we stop like throwing sand at each other in the sandbox, we might actually start to get to, build something.
Yeah. Well, and in seeing things so differently, I mean, we see things rather similarly, but collectively, many people are off in their own worlds. It seems that we are in we're experiencing a split, but then there's also like fractals within that split. And yeah, diversity of thought is definitely my number one priority, and what I really pride myself on. And that's what I love about you, is even through your art, there's diversity in there. At the same time, we as in America, like Americans, we need one canvas. I think we need to agree on some fundamental American values and what that means for the way that we interact with the world at large. So, what is that canvas? What are those values?
I think we do agree. We just have those, like, mean girls at the, in the cafeteria constantly telling us, no, 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 she hates you and you hate her. Like, I mean, I think on any topic, whether it's the environment or it's race or it's public education or, the right to, be safe or whatever, like Second Amendment first. I mean, I really think if we could just like cut out all the dumb talking points and all the things the talking heads have been telling us on the news about this group of people or that group of people or whatever, or what's compassionate, what's not, or I think we could just talk about it. I think we would find that we all agree. And like just the environment is a good example. People get so contentious about that. And there's so much, oh, this is true. No, this is true. You're stupid. You're stupid. But ultimately, no one wants to live on a trash pile. No one is like, yeah, I really want my grandchildren to live in Gotham City and like have to wear gas masks. Like that's what I want. Nobody wants that. No oil tycoon is like, yeah, that's what I'm aiming for. You know what I mean? We all want a basic sense of dignity and beauty and all that stuff. It's just balancing it with the other priorities of like, well, how do we make a living and how do we provide jobs for people and how do we have transportation? But it's like, we all want the same things. We want cleanliness and dignity. We want, I think the Constitution's pretty good. I think the Declaration of Independence is pretty good. I think if it's kind of the same as with any sort of like spiritual practice, if we just go back to what it says and stop fractioning off into like, well, we're just gonna, focus on this part or reinterpret. We just go back to the fundamentals. I think we could be okay. We're just so distracted and manipulated is how I feel about the situation, which again comes back to like, if my whatever I contribute to this life professionally, if my art can sort of be like visual yoga, if it somehow helps you come back to center and aligns you, we might all be able to get somewhere if we were less fractured in our minds and able to be like, hey, I want my kids to grow up to be cool people, to be kind and respectful and whatever too. Like, I may not want them to grow up hating themselves, but I want them to grow up with a basic sense of courtesy and appreciation for other people. Like, I think we'll all agree on that.
I think so. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, and I want to build upon this canvas analogy, and I agree with you. I think the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are canvases that we can come back to and hopefully use as sources of inspiration. And regarding your own art, have you ever been pressured to create in a certain way?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. People definitely have encouraged me. I would say encouraged is more accurate than pressured to be more direct in my art. Like to paint, all the different races in the world as flowers of one garden. Be more direct about healing racism and that sort of thing. And I I appreciate that, and I have done some art that's kind of more like propaganda, more like advertising for spiritual concepts. That's how I see it. But I do see it as propaganda as opposed to art when it's like right on the nose. Like, I want people to see this and think of the unity of the races. I want to move beyond these external differences. Like, my art is about what deeply unites us on a level that we maybe can't even see with our naked eyes, like how we are spiritually connected as beings on this planet. And like, I think if we're more in touch with that aspect, which admittedly is somewhat woo-woo, but I think it's galvanizing. I think there's a lot more that we can accomplish rather than just focusing on like social movements and the surface level of things. So I'm trying to get way deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are layers to this. So as you get deeper, do you still ever consider your art activism?
Mhm. You know, my initial answer would be no, it's not activism, it's art, you know? But then at a deeper level, I am trying to activate myself as I create, and I am hoping to activate the souls of the people who look at my art. And again, it's not activism like, wow, I'm so inspired, I'm now going to join that group or that, coalition or whatever. But it's like being spiritually activated. And again, like symbols in a dream, you take the motivation, the activation that you need for your life, just that little nudge, I hope, to help push you to what you know you need to be doing right now. That's my form of activism.
Yeah, yeah. So through individualism rather than collectivist mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah, I gotcha. So we finally met at Freedom Fest in person.
Yes.
And why were you excited to share your paintings at Freedom Fest instead of perhaps another venue or gathering?
Because I wanted to meet Dave Rubin. And Larry Elder and Joshua Phillips and all those people. The deeper reason is that I feel a camaraderie of truth seekers at the crowd that's attracted to Freedom Fest. Different political beliefs, different spiritual beliefs, but an attraction, a seeking out of truth. And that's what I think is the most important. And I don't know of any other group quite like that as the crowd that was gathered at Freedom Fest. So I wanted to be with other truth seekers and, share my art, which is about the liberation, the liberty of the human spirit, with fellow truth seekers who are trying to answer questions and trying to find how they can contribute to this, spiritual battle, this political revolution, this American revolution that's happening.
Hmm. Yeah, it was an incredible crowd. And I found myself doing this dance even in my own like content and sending out an email to my list about like going to Freedom Fest. And I found myself kind of like I'm trying to appeal to as many people as possible and encourage as many people as possible to engage with the event and what it has to offer. At the same time, I think you've probably noticed this too, that even the word freedom has become politicized.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
Because there is an intentional effort to destroy the values of this country, because a people that have that protect and embrace their God-given rights is a fundamental threat to groupthink and manipulation.
Okay, let's get into it.
Uh-oh, what have I done?
All right, so how we met online is I looked up divine civilization versus new world order.
Did you actually look up that phrase?
I think that's actually what I looked up.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. And then I found your video. And even I'm a bit shy to talk about what that entails and why I Googled that. But just you know that, but just to give our viewers a little heads up, like we're both members of the Baha'i faith. And we sort of walk this very fine line between not getting involved in partisan politics, but also being very aware about what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually deeply in our writings, is we should be
Mm-hmm.
very heightened to the affairs of the world. So the phrase new world order, or just world order, is actually in the writings. However, the divine civilization that we were raised with to imagine is quite the opposite of what a new world order sounds like
Mm-hmm.
in our day-to-day, perhaps conspiratorial news. So tell me more about that video. What prompted you to make it, and what is the difference between a divine civilization as you understand it and a new world order?
Mm-hmm. Well, my understanding is constantly evolving, and I am on a journey of learning. But so I just want to make that clear, and also that this is not any sort of like official Baha'i perspective. This is a perspective of Jackie, who is a Baha'i who's trying to like deeply learn the the treasures, true gems of my faith and sacred writings, which is unique in that it addresses the spiritual life of the individual and um, sort of principles and guidelines for a spiritual society and civilization. But so where I was coming from in that video was like going head first into this topic that I knew would be triggery for both sides, right? I understand what people are afraid of when they have a knee jerk to like new world order or world order. I understand the fear of a tyrannical, no escape, bad, one world system, like, where it's not like, well, I'm going to go to some other country. It's like, no, the whole world is ruled by these evil, scary people. And as much as that may sound like a fairy tale, I don't know that it's all that far from the world of possibility. So I totally understand that. And I also have grown up with a little bit more comfort with that phrase than say that average American, and because of the use of it in the Baha'i writings. And so I wanted to address the difference and I'm still, the interesting thing about being an artist and putting out content in this day and age, being a podcaster, is that you share your thoughts and your learning as they evolve, So I'm even sort of in a new place from when I made that video. But fundamentally, the big difference here is that a divine civilization starts with the spiritual development and transformation of the individual. And then as the individuals become a collective, the number of people who are guided by an actual sense of morality and truth and a sense of their spiritual nobility. Ooh, did you hear that?
Yeah, there's a train.
Wow, mesmerizing.
It's unavoidable. I'm sorry.
Yes, it was like, yes, sister, that's it. There's spiritual nobility. Da, da, da. You got a music accompaniment. That was great. Then we will have a starting point for being able to create a cohesive, neighborhood, village, city, state, nation state, world that is ruled by spiritual principles rather than greed or, status or whatever it is that our world seems to be currently based on. So that's the biggest difference. And I think it's going to take a lot of time. Unfortunately, I think the transformation of the world spiritually is always just a generation away, but that would require a great deal of a lot of people suddenly being on the same page about, wanting to raise a generation with a strong sense of their nobility, spiritual nobility, and a moral compass and all that stuff. So I think it's a grassroots to the top thing, not a top down oppressive thing. We're not, you can't, I don't believe you can regulate morality, and it is deeply naive, in my opinion, of humanity to be like, you know what, I'm just gonna, give my rights away. I'm just gonna let those people, whoever they be in charge, because we have proven ourselves, and especially during 2020, when it became real clear the disparity between do as I say, not as I do, like with COVID regulations, like all these governors and pundit type people were like not following their own ordinances. That's what we don't want with a tyrannical, world system that we wouldn't be able to escape. And that's what's happened every time in known history when some sort of moral or social structure was imposed top down, because humanity is not spiritually mature or developed. The people with the power or ability to hoard resources or whatever have done so at the expense of everyone else. So the difference is it's spiritual, it's each individual, and then from then being able to like collaborate and make things groovy. And from a Baha'i perspective, following Baha'u'llah's blueprint. Baha'u'llah is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. But the Baha'i writings talk a lot about like seeing with your own eyes and having a pure heart and all of that stuff. There's a lot of stuff to do before we get to world organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, the independent investigation of truth.
Exactly. And we can't have independent investigation of truth if there is censorship, if there is a shutting down of ideas, if there is an intolerance for diversity of thought. You cannot have independent investigation of truth. You can't have collaboration if any of those things are happening. So that's what I'm really passionate about. Until we clean that up, it's dangerous to even play with some of these concepts, in my opinion, of world collaboration. If we can't. I just put a post about somebody I know personally who had damages from one of the vaccines on Facebook. And I got around any sort of flagging. Like they didn't flag my post, right? Because I so intentionally didn't say anything specifically that would trigger like the Facebook, algorithm or whatever. But the fact that I have to do that, right? Like somebody that I know personally legitimately got hurt from this thing that is being like forced and mandated in a lot of places, and I have to use code words to be able to even talk about it. Hello, people. Something is not right.
Something is up for sure. You can't even use a needle emoji, can you? I think even that sets off the Facebook fact checkers. Yeah.
That's why I wrote it out. That's
Yeah.
why I said insert needle emoji. I didn't even put the emoji. Yeah, that's insane. That's insane.
And it's also insane that you had to say, I think you prefaced the news with, I'm not inviting any contention, prayers only, love only. And it's like, it's insane that we live in a society where you have to do that. Like, I'm not inviting any contention by asking you to pray for my friend.
Yep.
Crazy. Another video you did, which motivated me to reach out to you personally, was the one on the Great Reset. And you called it the not so great reset.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what you've discovered about the Great Reset and perhaps any crises of faith that you've experienced during that independent investigation.
Oh man. Well, it's very similar to the divine civilization versus new world order. I recorded that, I think, in this late summer, midsummer 2020, and it was really one, a lot of people at that time anyway didn't even seem to know about the Great Reset. I mean, my people did, right? But not my Facebook friends. And so that's a red flag. Like, hey, there's this whole concept and idea about how to change your life, and you don't even know about it, right? Like, that's scary. We should at least be part of the discussion. And then that disparity that was so clear in 2020 between, some of the ordinances for COVID and that sort of thing, and then you find out XY governor was seen, 7 hours later violating their own rules, stuff like that. Where it's like, how about you just not make the rules, and then you won't be breaking them, and you won't be preventing people from having Thanksgiving, like, So the basic premise, even though I did go over some elements of what the Great Reset is, or the concept of exploiting the change that happened from COVID and the lockdowns to, build back better. The main emphasis was just that we need to not hand over our sovereignty, our autonomy, our lives to entities and plans and people that, one, we're not paying attention to, two, have proved themselves to be untrustworthy and hypocritical. Like, ultimately, that was it. And my current crisis of faith, oh God, I'm very humbled, and I'm very aware that I have a lot to learn, and sort of a posture of that, of just like knowing that I don't have all the answers. And even as a person of faith, and even as a person whose faith very clearly talks about some of these social principles and organizing of society, that just like a lot of people of religious practice, that's sort of icing on top instead of a deep fundamental core. I find that I have fallen into sort of a talking points thing, or like I could give the example of like a sermon-based Christianity instead of a biblical Christianity, like Adam and Eve ate the apple. And it's like, well, it doesn't say apple, it says fruit, like, what does it actually say? And because the Baha'i faith does talk about the oneness of humanity and the need to live as one planet, and these principles that can be exploited or interpreted as falling into a certain side of the political spectrum, which is kind of like where I was growing up, like, oh, well, I believe in being a steward of the earth, and I believe all of humanity is one family, and I believe men and women are equal in the sight of God. Like, these concepts, if I just say them, like, could sound like they're on one side of a political spectrum, but they're not political ideas. They're deeply spiritual ideas. And for me, it's been kind of, I'm in this journey of sort of parsing, separating a sort of broad concept to like, no, what's actually going on here? And even learning about the world order of Baha'u'llah. Like, I've had this sort of talking point, like Sunday school version of like, oh, well, Baha'is believe blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, maybe I need to like, not just like read, but like study and deeply parse and understand this, as opposed to just repeating what I've heard all my life. Does that make sense? I went a lot of places with that.
Yeah, you went to some really great places, as you do on YouTube and in your podcast. What I love about that is that you have a very spiritual and religious base. I can tell. I imagine your audience is, and you're not really shy to bring in these contemporary issues, like you've even talked about, like trans issues, and I think you've touched upon do as I say, not as I do regarding the COVID regulation. So there is this dance that we're doing around our religion. I imagine around other religions too. Many people can share that experience. And also around the word of freedom, not the word, not capital W, but the word freedom. Like there, that is also one word that can be taken to a place that probably wouldn't serve any of us well in the long run. Even the word liberal means free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem like it does anymore, but that is what it means.
But that's part of this war here, is the hijacking of language. You can't, how unfair that you can't say liberal without it meaning a rather rigid set of beliefs, or you can't say freedom without it sounding, triggering people that you're about to shoot them or something. Like, I don't know what, what I mean? Like, that's really sad that the language itself has been so hijacked.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I mean, I don't know why I smile when I say that. I think I giggle nervously because as a
Yeah.
writer,
Yeah.
as a writer, I've been so shocked and really taken back by the hijacking of language. And that's why I do believe that visual art and other forms of art can lead the way and be a bridge. That's why I loved the postcard that you made to promote your trip to Freedom Fest with your face on Mount Rushmore and the little paintbrush. What reactions did you get from people across the political spectrum on that postcard?
Mm-hmm. I didn't hear any of the negative. And I have no doubt that some people had a negative reaction. That's Freedom Fest is contentious for some people, and Rushmore itself is has a people have checkered reactions to it, which I respect and I appreciate. I want to ask, have you been there? Because it's stunning and it's incredible work of human ingenuity balanced with nature, and it's amazing. But yes, admittedly, I did not hear the negative Nancy's at all. And one piece of positive feedback that I got was just that was exactly what Mount Rushmore needed. It needed a woman
Yeah.
who happens to have a little bit of Native American in her, and has this sort of like holistic, long haired, artistic vibe. And it's like, there we go. That's what it needed. Done. We fixed it.
Yeah. I love how you can kind of mess with people's paradigms in that way, right?
I like to, and I try to,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, you definitely do. Yeah. And looking again at the artwork behind you, how does the imagery, the texture, the shading, and the color reflect freedom? Big
Oh,
question.
good.
Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I see the paintings as like portals or doors. We're like looking, the frame of the painting is like the frame of the door to this other vision, that I hope is expansive and, as you said, like rich with color and texture and nuance. It's like a world you can step into, and there's a confinement to it. It's limited to that space. The image itself actually does not move or change, right? It's like the static image, but it conveys a sense of motion and possibility. And I feel that that's very much what we are. Like, we are contained by our bodies. We have limitations. We can only be in so many places at once, and we only live so long, and all that stuff. Like, there's a sense of containment, but we are also this like ultimate endless mystery, and that's what the artwork is like a reflection of, and in these endless creative and symbolic ways. So when I create, it's, for me, it is literally a journey and an exploration. Very rarely do I know where the painting is going to end up. So every one of those layers and textures, and I use different mediums sometimes, and I paint in many, many layers, and the painting starts as a desert and then it ends up under the sea, or it turns into a woman, or whatever. It's all been this journey, which again is also how our individual lives are, and the history of the world. And we take these turns and we go, and ultimately it comes to what I hope is like a really beautiful place. And so each painting, thoroughly unique and different, but it all has a sense of these different weaving paths. It has this sense of like an entry into an expansive vision that's full of symbolism and meaning, and the mysteries of our souls and how they unfold and we influence each other.
Mm. Yeah. It's beautiful how you also weave visual art with, I guess, vocal art with your own words on your podcast. And you have a YouTube channel where you speak about spiritual discourse. I noticed that in one of your recent videos, you called it spiritual discourse. And I loved the pairing of those words, because normally we hear political discourse. So what is spiritual discourse?
Mm. Well, I think at heart, political discourse and social discourse, if we go beyond the surface level issues, it is a spiritual discourse. Like, to me, it's all the same thing, which is a deep, fundamental exploration of truth. And if we all prioritize truth and honesty, then I think it's safe to hold the acceptance that we're all like seeing and expressing an aspect of truth, and through that discourse we can expand each other's vision. We can widen the light that's being shined on things. So ultimately it's all the same, and a deep exploration of like truth and reality. And then from there, how do we like live in greater alignment with that reality, and how does that influence how we spend our time and the quality of our relationships and what we create and how we organize society, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and your podcast is called Spiritual Conversation. Why is it singular and not plural? I feel like you were very particular in making.
I guess because ultimately all of our conversations are connected, you know? Um, I'm going to totally steal and borrow an idea here, from my fiance, actually, Sam Bago. If he ever watches this, he has a book.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. He has a book called Modes of Conversation. And he brings forth the idea that all of our conversations in life are all connected. Like, this conversation between you and I is influenced by other conversations we've both had with other people, right? There's a continuousness to it. And this conversation is going to influence future conversations we have with other people. And then there's the conversation ultimately that's always going on in our own mind. And, like really it's a conversation with ourselves, no matter who we're interfacing with. So it wasn't a conscious choice, actually, Sienna. It was just, hi guys, let's have a spiritual conversation. But now I see that there is, it's all one thing. And I think the less we can fragment issues and life and aspects of life, or even the concept of conversations, if it's not fragmented, like it's all one thing, that's kind of like some level of the healing for the division and the fragmentation of our minds, is to come back to a remembrance that everything is connected, and this is all one thing, and it's all one conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you're speaking to the difference between oneness and collectivism, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And when did you first start your channel and what motivated you to do so?
Yeah. So um I started my channel in 2018, and I had just been really getting into the YouTube intellectual dark web, the Rubens and Petersons and Rogans and stuff of the world. And I saw one particular interview of Dave Rubin with two guests, with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. And so we have this like, classical liberal, married gay LA guy. We have this very conservative, mainstream Jewish guy. And then we have this like mystical Christian professor, lecturer type. And it was a really riveting conversation. And yet I felt that there was one thing missing. And there was also something that they were all grasping at, but not quite holding. And I felt at the time, and I still do, though I'm more humbled than I was at the time, I felt like there was a lot in the Baha'i teachings that would address what they were sort of trying to grasp at, which was these ideas about a spiritual society, and the solution for the individualism versus collectivism, but rather how it is cohesive, that individuals make up community. That's how it works. So I had this like desire to be able to articulate somewhat of a Baha'i perspective, and I felt that they needed to have a woman at the table, you know and I wished that I could fill both of those roles. And I thought, well, instead of like, you know, going becoming a hermit for 15 years and dedicating myself to study to figure it all out and then coming back to the table, maybe I can just share my learning journey on YouTube, and in that way be a voice in that YouTube, intellectual dark web type of thing. So
Yeah.
that was the inspiration.
I'm glad that you did. You were exactly what I needed in the moment that I found you in 2020.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And maybe this is just the writer in me, but when I noticed the name of your podcast is Spiritual Conversation, and I noticed that it doesn't have an A or a the. It's not the spiritual conversation, like it's not the only one, and it's not even a spiritual conversation. And what I've also noticed is that we have what's called the science these days. Follow the science instead of just science. And it frustrates me because I feel like the word the almost entraps science. Like it keeps it in these shackles, and these like political and big pharma greedy shackles, when it's the science rather than just science. What are you noticing around language and generally just around the atmosphere of following the science? And is that also part of the spiritual battle?
God, I mean, I think you said it. You said it, Sitzer. It's the co-opting of language. It's the um it's the, trying to put a stake in truth or reality or something, you know what I mean? It is, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but like trying to confine something and saying this is the only way and nothing else is allowed or questioned, or you're not following the science, right? And as you said, if you said follow science, that's so broad, and there's so much space in that. Like it's a spacious idea, and there's room for exploration and investigation and all the stuff. Like, and we could all get on board with that. See, that's also the thing. No one would disagree with, maybe some people would, I don't know, but very few people, I think, would disagree with follow science. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to be a healthy person, I should probably follow science and see what science is learning and discovering and coming up with, or proving. But when it is the science, that's such a good point, you as a writer pointing out, then there's something you can argue with. And then it's like, oh, you don't follow the science? You don't believe in the science? It's kind of like, are you still beating your wife? Like, no, I'm not. Oh, you're not still beating her? No, I never was beating. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a way to make people argue. It's a way to create division when it's the big thing, and you can't. It's like purposely creating a no-win, and it's purposely creating something you can't disagree with without becoming an other. And yeah, I love that you pointed that out about spiritual conversation. It's meant to be spacious, it's meant to be open, it's meant to be an exploration. And even, my ideas change and evolve. I am not presenting the unchanging Jackie perspective. I'm sharing what insights I've had that day in hopes that it sparks something in you. And then maybe you'll write me and you'll say something that sparks something else. And there again is that continuous conversation that is spacious.
Yeah, and very much needed in this time of containers and throwing the at an otherwise free word. Anyway, that's just something that, like, I really get caught up on language and the word games, and that was one of my main reasons for leaving the Left for Liberty. It was like this like neurodivergent part of me that was just like, I can't with these word games. We I think we even touched upon earlier in our conversation, like in LA, where like love was actually hate, freedom is slavery, that sort of like inversion, which I mean, I think there's a spiritual element to that too. I mean, inversion is not
satanic. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. You said, I'm like, it is not of God. Like, it is not. Like, it's just, yeah. Yeah. And you're very open about talking about like pretty much everything. I mean, we've even talked about the New World Order, but is there any one issue that you shy away from talking about?
I try to still keep my statements fairly broad. I try not to like name drop or talk about very specific people or issues or, political yada yada whatever, because I want to reach people, and I would love to not just be speaking to the choir. And I think it's so easy to turn people off by using the wrong language, or language that has been, corrupted or whatever. Or if you side with a certain person or party or proposition or whatever, that it can, turn off the very people you're hoping to like help open their eyes a little bit. And that's a struggle for me. Sometimes I think, should I be more direct? Should I just come out and say it the way it is? But there's a lot of great people who do that. And so far in my creative journey and stuff, my desire has been to like touch hearts and to do so if, as gently as I can, like reach my hand out as far as I can, as gently as I can. So yeah, I still try to stay somewhat broad and sometimes vague.
Yeah. Well, and I can't help but name drop Dave Rubin after we met him, and
Yes,
we're
yes.
best friends now. So
You and Dave, I'm jealous.
no, I mean I feel like the three of us.
Oh yes, we hang out all the time.
Yeah. And what have you learned about yourself over this past year and a half?
That I am a work in progress, and to really try to catch myself in judgments of people, because I found life is like you always get your comeuppance, and there's so many times where I've thought like, I can't believe that person, or I would never do that, or how do people get themselves into these sort of situations? And then at some point down the road, like I'll find myself kind of being that person or in a similar situation. And I'm like, dang, I shouldn't have judged that person. And I think that uh yeah, like I think it's bad to soften a culture, and I think in like the weakening of family ties and family values and stuff, there's been a softening which makes us easy to divide. And I think that that's bad. But I think as individuals too, we talked about that at Freedom Fest, actually. What was it? To have like a soft heart and thick skin.
Yes. Oh, I can't remember who said that, but it did stick with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think really it doesn't mean to be a pushover. It doesn't mean to let go of your principles or your values. It doesn't mean you can't fight for what you believe, but on an individual level, to to have a soft heart towards other people and their struggles, and someone who's deeply brainwashed or deeply trapped in an ideology or whatever, like there's not a whole lot of good that comes out of just relentless judging and hating of them. So to be soft and that is something that I've been learning without intending to learn lately.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been working on that too. And it's hard when some very loud voices are calling for the shaming, shunning, and marginalization of their fellow people. And it's really, really hard to stay kind and loving, even just within myself, when
Mm-hmm.
faced with that and faced with uh, people in my life who aren't standing up to it or who might even agree that it's necessary. What are you seeing in terms of really public calls to shame and shun fellow Americans? And how do you stay soft and centered through all that?
Oh yeah, well, I'm definitely seeing it. Whether it's shaming people for their political beliefs, their stance on health and the vaccine and COVID and all that stuff, um, the color of their skin they're being shamed for. There's a lot of shaming going on. um, I'm really lucky that I'm pretty insulated and that the people closest to me have a similar perception of what's going on in the world. So I am able to kind of, not be on social media too much and powwow. I get my strength from the people closest to me who know what's going on and know we have some differences that enrich our perspectives. Ultimately, it's like we check notes that like, are you seeing what I'm seeing type of thing. And so that's very galvanizing. um and hmm, I think part of it is things you and I have talked about personally, like that softness and compassion also has to be applied to ourselves, right? If interactions are weakening us and we need to be strong for the spiritual battle that we're in, then we have to reevaluate those interactions. So that's a layer of it. And I think those choices have more power when they're not coming from a place of anger. They're coming from a place of, this is my deepest truth. And the severing of this conversation, this has to happen right now. That's one way to practice softening. The Baha'i writings, there's a quote that says, like, if you possess a jewel of truth, share it in a language of utmost kindliness and goodwill. And if it is received, in my own words, it's like, that's great. And if it's not, leave them unto themselves and beseech God to guide him. So to me, that really is that balance of being soft and kind, and then saying, okay, well, I'm going to put my energy somewhere else right now.
Yeah. And there is a sovereignty in that softness and kindness. There's a freedom there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does spiritual freedom mean for you?
Spiritual freedom for me is acknowledging my free will and the responsibility and the ownership and the power of that. That I am spiritually free because I have free will. Somebody can put me in prison and my will is still my own. There's no way anyone can touch it. And you can also live in a mansion and be a slave to a corrupt corporation or corrupt ideology. So it is the acknowledgement, the embracing, and the ownership of my free will.
And what does creative freedom mean for you?
To be able to, like, act on those ideas, to see with my own eyes, to because I think vision is a big part of creativity, and to know that possibilities are infinite. Like, that's creative. We create our moments, and that creates our lives. So creative freedom is really just like an extension of spiritual freedom. It's like the expression of spiritual freedom, the expression of free will.
Yeah, beautifully said. And that's actually what I'm getting at in this series of Leaving the Left for Liberty. If you notice, I'm not saying leaving the left for the right. That would be actually be a very boring title and would be lacking in alliteration. It's leaving the left for liberty. So I'm implying that there is a third way and perhaps an infinite number of ways that we can take this and still, acknowledge the binaries and the dualities in our world, which are very natural, while also playing with it. And I think that's what you do through your art and through your podcasting. And I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So as we've talked about, you do have a strong online presence and you do sell your art. So where can people find you?
Sure thing. So everything is Jacqueline Claire Art, spelled the classic, Jacqueline Kennedy type of way. JACQUELINE, and then Claire, CLAIRE. And my website, JacquelineClaireArt.com, Instagram, Jacqueline Claire Art, and Facebook as well. And yeah, I would love for especially your audience here to connect with me, because I like to gather truth seekers,
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
All right, girl. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. And let's stay in touch. Keep talking.
Thanks. This was awesome. Thanks for having me, Sienna.
You're welcome. Take care.